I've titled my testimony Arms Still Open, and you'll see why at the end. So let's get started. Often I've heard people speak of a single defining moment that led them to Christ. But for me, it wasn't one big revelation that brought me to my knees, surrendering my life to Jesus. No, it was 1,000 moments, both big and small. Each one a gentle whisper, a loving nudge, an answered prayer, or simply just his hands of protection upon me. Matthew 5 verse 16 says, "Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." So here I am, placing myself in a position of complete vulnerability to share my testimony with all of you, to share how even in the darkest of dark places, the Lord can give you light, and only because his love never fails do I have a testimony I am able to share with you. I grew up in a home filled with love for the Lord. My parents' devotion was evident in the way they lived. They didn't just live out their faith on Sundays at church. Their love for the Lord and their steady teaching of Jesus' love was woven into the very fabric of our everyday life. Among all these formative moments, one memory shines especially bright. I was around 6 years old when I woke one morning, my heart bursting with joy, because I had dreamed of running through a field of daisies straight into the arms of Jesus. I couldn't wait to tell my parents, to share with them the overwhelming love Jesus has for me and how much I loved him, that he was my best friend. That is the beauty of a child's faith, unshaken, uncomplicated, trusting without hesitation. It is humble, it is sure, it does not question, and it is so beautifully pure. In Matthew 18, verse 3-5, Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes one child like this in my name welcomes me." Looking at this verse, I see him telling us that children are the purest form of faith that we are called to embody. Now, when I look back on that little girl, her heart so full of unguarded belief, I feel both tenderness and sorrow, because along the way, that little girl let go of her childlike faith, and then she let go of her faith altogether. But still, Jesus stood in that field of daisies, arms open wide, waiting for her. And so now, I will take you on a journey through my darkest of dark moments, the sad, the terrible, the broken, the lost paths that eventually led me back into Jesus' arms. That beautiful dream was one of the last pure childhood memories I have of my young faith. As I grew older, I became more aware of the world around me, and with that came the slow unraveling of myself. First, anxiety made an appearance. It began with the overwhelming fear that I was going to lose the people I loved. That then morphed into just being fearful in general. A constant feeling of impending doom sitting upon my shoulders. My parents would constantly try to reassure me, but this only caused me to become distrustful, because how could they be telling me the truth when everything felt so bad? Then came my early teens, and with them, the crushing weight of the world's expectations. Suddenly, I wasn't just a girl anymore. I was now a mirror held up to society's impossible standards. Not thin enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, not funny enough, just not enough. The child who believed she was fearfully and wonderfully made now wondered if she was God's greatest mistake. I wish I knew back then what I know now. The devil is a liar, and God chose me long before my feet were even upon this earth. As Psalm 139 verse 16 says, "Your eyes saw me when I was formless. All my days were written in your book and planned before a single one of them began." I know this now, but that back then I believed all the lies the devil and the world were telling me. And so my anxiety was no longer just that. It took on a new companion, and that companion was depression, a shadow I couldn't outrun. I sat in psychiatrists' offices, being diagnosed with one problem after another, and prescribed countless pills to make me better, but they never helped. They never made the darkness recede. They didn't take away the feelings of hopelessness. They didn't make things feel less scary. and they sure didn't help me feel like I could fit in, that maybe I could be normal. At 14, so desperate to belong, I drank alcohol for the first time and didn't stop until I woke up the next morning with no recollection of the night before. That night was the first step I took into a labyrinth of substance abuse. So now weekend drinking became my ritual. Alcohol smuggled into friends' houses, drunken nights in parks, and mornings filled with hazy blanks where memories should have been. Then came the boys, and with them, a new role to play. I learned to twist myself into whatever they wanted. The wild girl, the reckless girl, the one who drank the hardest, took the most risks with not a care in the world about the consequences. I chased their approval like it was all I needed in the world, mistaking their cheers for acceptance. The more I let go of my inhibitions, dignity and control, the more they applauded. So I poured myself into the mold that I believed would make me a somebody in the eyes of my peers. These nights were a performance, and I was the entertainment. But when the bottles emptied and the people left, all that remained was a young girl who didn't know who she was or where she belonged. My teen years became a blur of chaos and rebellion. Nights spent slipping out to meet up with friends older than me, stealing my parents' cars and racing to clubs all over the city, and then spending the mornings trying to piece the nights before together. I was always towing the line of complete disaster. Unfortunately, chasing acceptance was the only thing I knew, and I would do anything to attain it. My family, once my foundation, became strangers living under the same roof. My sister, once my best friend, withdrew from me completely. Her words harsh but true. You make everything heavy. You make everyone unhappy. At the time, I thought she was being purposely hurtful, but now I know she wasn't. She was being truthful, and I just didn't want to accept it. Our home was always a chorus of shouting, slammed doors, and hurtful words, and I was the conductor. At this point, my father had become very resentful of me, disgusted by my behavior, and disappointed that I wasn't the daughter he thought I would be. And so in anger, he would say, "You will never amount to anything. You're the reason I didn't want to have children. Get away from me. I don't want to see your face. Failure, trash, disappointment." His words carved deeper than I think he knew, feeding the lie that had already taken root in me. I was unworthy of love. Please don't get me wrong. My father was a good man, but due to his many traumas throughout life, he was also a hurt man, and hurt people hurt people. I was unfortunately a reflection of his own broken past staring back at him. Yet even though these harsh words were often spoken, he always showed up when I needed him. He always worried for me, and I know he always prayed for me. But still, he was my white whale, the approval I could never quite get. And my poor mother, she just tried to love me through it, tried so hard to understand, but she too began to give up. And so one by one, the threads that held my life together unraveled. My family, once my sanctuary, were now the people I tried the hardest to get away from. The love I had for them and them for me, now buried by layers of distrust, disappointment, hurt, and anger. By this point, my depression had become a permanent, dark, heavy shadow draped over my life. It had taken up residence in my mind, and seeing as the pills failed to help, I was going to find a way to beat it. I thought maybe by creating physical pain, I could bring some feelings back. Good, bad, it didn't matter. I just wanted something to take away the overwhelming feeling of emptiness. And so I decided that self-harming might be the way to help me feel real again. The physical pain was something I could understand, something I could control. But after the small moment, the relief the rush of pain provided, the shame and self-loathing always flooded in heavier than before. And so I'd hide the marks on my wrists and pretend nothing happened until the next time. I continued to express my anger, pain, and belief in my worthlessness by hurting myself in any way I could. Self-harming, drinking myself into oblivion, and doing drugs were what I always went to. This led to my dad becoming more resentful of me, my sister more fed up, and my mom still trying to find a way to save her daughter. I was so wrapped up in my own struggles, so selfishly obsessed with my pain that I didn't notice their pain. I did not see how much they were suffering because of me. You see, being a slave to the world makes you an incredibly self-involved person. You care only about what you are going through and not what you are putting others through. I was tearing my family apart. My dad wanted to cut me off. My mom would fight him because she just wanted to save me. My sister totally broke away and would stay at friends' homes just to get away. Satan had his claws in me, and like a puppet, I let him pull the strings. In Matthew 12, verse 25, Jesus says, "Every kingdom divided against itself is headed for destruction, and no city or house divided against itself will stand." Satan loves to create division and disharmony as it leads to relationships and family units breaking down. I was the catalyst creating division, doing the work Satan so loves. My parents prayed for me all the time, pleaded with God for my salvation, and sometimes in my moments of nearing complete ruin, I would beg them to pray for me. Unfortunately, that vulnerable moment would then pass. I would put my walls back up and deny any belief that Jesus could help me. I was too far gone. So I continued to move through the world half alive until I didn't want to be alive at all. The feeling like I didn't belong, that my loved ones would be better off without me, became so all-consuming, so unbearably painful, that I tried to take my life. To leave this world believing everything would be so much better once I was gone. The attempt, although close, failed. And I know it is because God refused to let me go. I just didn't realize it at the time. I ended up in the psych ward with yet another doctor prescribing me more pills, promising they would make me better. They didn't. I eventually got released and went straight back to living each day in the monotony of my misery. They say misery loves company, and my misery found the company when I was 17 years old. He was a few years older than me, and like me, he carried a rage against the world. I thought, well, here's someone who understands me. He'll understand the pain I carry. And so for a little while, we shared our pain. We would talk about how we didn't fit in, open up about our fears and hurts. But after a month or so passed, his anger was no longer a companion to mine, but rather became a weapon turned on me. It started with hateful words being shouted at my face, to him eventually using a combination of words and fists. And so there were those words playing on a loop in my mind once again: worthless, unlovable, not enough. You would think I would leave at this point. I didn't. I stayed because I couldn't imagine I was worth more than the boy who treated me like I was worthless. So I stayed until he left and blamed myself for the fact that he did. Nearly 2 years later, and many more messy moments of blurred evenings and dark days, I met the father of my 2 beautiful children. Another man whose soul was lost to the haze of substance abuse and lies. A man trying so hard to prove to the world how little he cared. Our relationship was chaotic. We would lose days to our substance abuse. This lifestyle started catching up to me. At some point, the guilt I had been keeping locked down for years had started breaking free. I had been telling myself that it's okay. Right now, I don't want Jesus, but maybe one day. So I will just keep him at a distance until I decided whether I wanted to turn my life around or even believe in him. When I'm done living on my terms, I will consider Jesus. I will fix things with my family. I would tell myself anything to keep that guilt locked down. But one day, I woke up feeling a little more hollow than usual, and I had the overwhelming feeling of I just can't anymore. The crashing lows were becoming too much to handle. And so for the first time in years, I slowed down. I cut out the drugs, but the drinking did remain. My boyfriend at the time did not want to follow my lead. I accepted it. Who was I at the end of the day to give advice? During this time, little behaviors and comments would slip out, things that I should have questioned but turned a blind eye to. He eventually proposed. I said yes. I was too young. I was just a girl, barely 21 the day I got married to the man I knew deep down wasn't right for me. My family saw it before I did. Their hearts were broken for me because they knew what I would eventually come to know. So on my wedding day, my father, with tears in his eyes, pulled me aside and begged me not to get married. He told me I was making a mistake, but I brushed him off and called him selfish. He wasn't wrong, though. I knew that. As the aisle stretched before me, my own tears fell, not from joy, but from the quiet, crushing certainty that this was a mistake, that I was choosing him not out of love, but out of fear, the fear that no one else would ever want me. And still I walked forward toward a life I think I knew would unravel. A few short months after getting married, I got pregnant with my first son, Levi. My little blessing after being told there was a strong possibility I would never be able to have children. During this time, that niggling, guilty feeling I had been experiencing since stopping using became a little knock on the doors of my heart, a desire to seek God. So I started attending church with, to their joy, my parents, and then my husband. Looking back, I know that I didn't truly understand what it was to have a relationship with the Lord. I didn't really know that there was a lot more to it than just going to church on a Sunday. I kept it surface level, never truly willing to go deeper. And so that piece of me that always felt so empty remained. Then Levi was born, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel so hollow. There was still that emptiness, but the overwhelming joy and love of becoming a mother dulled that ache for a while. 6 months of many joyful moments with my son and I passed until some of the darkness I had managed to push away returned. My husband at the time slipped back into his old habits. It started with disappearing for hours and eventually coming home drunk, to him getting drunk at home and becoming violent when I would plead with him to stop drinking. And so between the fists, hurtful words, and his demand over my body as if it were his right, the depression started clawing its way back out. That deafening self-doubt started shouting loudly in my mind once again. Worthless, a mistake, unlovable. Then came my second pregnancy. I prayed that maybe now, because I was pregnant, the abuse would stop. It didn't. He continued to scream, hit, and shove me, then leave me alone to care for my toddler while my body fought to hold on to a pregnancy that was constantly threatening to slip away. At 35 weeks, Nathan came too soon, born into the world struggling to breathe. He was rushed off to ICU and diagnosed with double pneumonia and a collapsed lung. They weren't sure if he'd be able to survive it. It was a waiting game. And so once again, in another dark moment of my life, I turned to God. Being the loving, faithful Father he is, he answered my prayers. A girl who had such little regard for his will for me, and still he listened. Still he answered. A week after he was born, he had started to make a remarkable recovery, and so I was able to hold him for the first time. 3 weeks after that, he was able to come home. Unfortunately, due to Nathan's battle with his health when he was born, he ended up being quite a sick baby. This meant I spent a lot of time with him in hospital. This was a very, very difficult time for me. I was 23, basically raising 2 children alone. Between work, hospital stays with my youngest, and trying to be fully present for my toddler, I was struggling. However, the hardest was always the evenings that I had to spend locked in the bathroom with my children to avoid a beating. Then the unimaginable happened. I found Levi floating face down in the swimming pool. We had taken off the nets to clean the pool, and I had asked his father to watch him while I fed the baby, but instead he was distracted by his phone while our son drowned. We pulled him out, and I began CPR. I screamed for help, and my neighbors came running into my house. As they took over, I fell to my knees sobbing, pleading with God for my son's life. While I did this, my neighbors were praying over him as they performed CPR. Levi began breathing, albeit labored, and so we rushed him to the hospital. I will never forget standing in that hospital resuscitation room, my baby crying for me in the next room, while I heard the doctors saying they can't stabilize Levi, screaming for other doctors to be called in, hearing nurses saying he isn't going to make it. He was eventually stabilized and moved to Garden's pediatric ICU. Levi was placed into a semi-induced coma and was put on life support. 7 days Levi spent in a coma. That first night Levi arrived, the doctor told us he didn't know if Levi would live. He had been without oxygen for around ±4 minutes and had inhaled so much water. And if he did live, there was a very strong possibility of brain damage. Over the next 7 days, God revealed himself in many ways. It began with the morning praise and worship led by the nurses, their devotion a daily reminder of his presence. Then came the prayers from our neighbors' churches to a friend's congregation in India, all fasting and interceding for Levi's healing. One evening, our pastor came to pray over him, and in that moment, the family beside us, whose son lay next to Levi, felt the stirring of faith. They too asked for prayer and surrendered their lives to the Lord. Then on the 7th day, the moment we had both longed for and feared arrived. Levi was brought out of his coma. I waited, terrified, wondering if his mind will still be the same. He woke up well, and after some testing, we were told he was completely fine. It was as if the accident had never happened. Overwhelmed with gratitude, I turned to thank the doctor, but he said to me, "No way, this wasn't me. This was the man upstairs." 2 days later, we went home, and Levi, at the tender age of 2, looked out the window to the pool and said to me, "Mommy, I died there, but Jesus saved me." You would imagine that after witnessing such a miracle, faith would come effortlessly, that the heart would surrender completely in awestruck gratitude. Oh, how I wish mine had. The trauma of nearly losing Levi left me like shattered glass, each fragment reflecting a different fear. I wouldn't sleep at night, but I rather stayed up, watching my son's chests rise and fall, terrified something might try to take them away from me again, and maybe this time succeed. My marriage remained a prison, and the abuse continued. So when I was invited to go out with old friends, I jumped at it. Anything to get away from my situation at home. The music played, the alcohol flowed, and when the powder appeared, I thought, why not? For a few stolen hours, the pain receded, until it came crashing back in a bathroom stall when 2 men sexually assaulted me. I was so out of it, I couldn't do anything to stop it, and so in the end, I blamed myself and attempted to brush it under the carpet. I couldn't bear to face that pain and shame, so I never told anyone. I never did anything about it. This led to me trying to drown the pain and despair so desperately that I ended up overdosing. I woke up 2 days later in hospital, being told I was being transferred to a rehab. But trying to work on yourself without God is like trying to heal a wound with dirty hands. I emerged from rehab with all my broken pieces still jagged and the added weight of maternal guilt. The particular agony of knowing you failed the ones you love most. I started believing my sons deserved better than me, that I would never be good enough. A month later, upon my release from rehab, with support from my family, I decided to ask my husband for a divorce. This unleashed a newfound rage in him, so bad, my parents finally saw what was happening to me in my marriage. They decided to pack mine and my children's things up and move me to the Western Cape with them. Their condition, though, was that I needed to go to a halfway house before moving in with them, to ensure I was stable. Their intentions were good, but unfortunately, this move ended up being the wrong choice. I had little support in the halfway house and sunk deeper into the darkness that had been following me. Once again, I cut God out of my life completely and started focusing on trying to run away from my problems. My husband was fighting me at every turn on the divorce and started harassing me daily, threatening me with physical harm, suicide, and of course, to take my sons away. This forced me to sign over temporary custody to my parents so that he wouldn't be able to take away or harm my sons. And so, of course, this came with more feelings of guilt and self-loathing, a bad mother, a failure. I would go visit my sons as often as I could, and although while I was with them, I would shower them with love and try make up for my failures, I would always leave feeling like the worst kind of person. During this time, I got a new boyfriend. He showed me so much love. He made me feel like I was worthy because I believed my worth could be found in a man. But he was also a broken individual with a hard past. His past was a crutch for his behavior, just like mine, and so I'd make excuses for the way he treated me and his loss of control of his temper. Then there came a night that started like so many others, drinking until the world blurred at the edges, chasing that sweet numbness where nothing hurt. I don't remember most of it, blackout drunk once again. But I do remember him taking advantage of me when I couldn't consent. I remember the violation, the confusion when my foggy mind pieced together what happened. And yet, I blamed myself instead of him. I told myself, I shouldn't have gotten so drunk. This is what happens when you lose control. He's my boyfriend. Doesn't that make it okay? The shame clung to me like a second skin. I felt dirty and used, but I swallowed those feelings down, buried them deep where no one could see. I stayed with him afterward because admitting the truth meant admitting I'd been violated, because maybe I deserved it, because the pain of staying hurt less than the truth would. I stayed until he left me. After that, I returned to my parents' embrace, their home becoming both a shelter and launching pad. There I started rediscovering motherhood, packing lunches, playing games, wiping away tears, and learning my son's laughter again. The job came next, my first trembling steps towards independence. This unfortunately meant I was living between my parents' home in Cape Town. With my parents' steadfast support, I began the slow battle for custody. Each court date, each signed document felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I thought I'd lost forever. Then came the excitement of getting my own home close to work, and my boys could finally come live with me. I was actually starting to get somewhere. Yet in the quiet moments, the emptiness still yawned wide. I no longer drowned myself in bottles or powders, but the darkness remained, now wearing the face of custody battles and my ex-husband's relentless attacks. Shame was still my shadow, and my insecurity still whispered that every hard-won victory was somehow still failure. God remained a distant concept, his absence like a phantom limb I couldn't stop reaching for. Although I was succeeding in a job and raising my sons in our own little home, I felt very alone, and so I eventually managed to get a job in the town my parents lived in and moved back in with them. They welcomed me back with open arms. Our relationship was still rocky, but we were all trying. My father struggled to build a relationship with me. He held on to those feelings of disappointment and anger about my poor life choices. It was a constant undercurrent in every conversation. Yet still, I kept reaching, kept hoping that one day I might finally earn his approval. Then came the diagnosis, stage 4 liver cancer. The doctors gave him months. In those final days, something shifted. The arguments fell away. The need to prove myself dissolved into something simpler, purer, just love, imperfect, unearned, but real. I stopped trying to change him, stopped waiting for the acceptance I'd spent a lifetime chasing. Instead, I sat beside him, held his hand, and let the quiet moments between us speak what words never could. I learned then that love doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it arrives in the stillness of surrender, in the grace of letting go. And for that time, however brief, it was enough. The night before he passed, he had his favorite praise and worship playing. I laid in his arms for the first time since being a child and got to tell him how much I loved him. Looking back, I know the Lord was in the room with us that evening, enveloping us in his love and mercy. That night, my father was lucid for the first time in a while, and during his moment of lucidity, he held me close and told me he was proud of me. I knew deep down he would no longer be with us come tomorrow. The phone call at work the next day to tell me that he had passed carried no surprise. I knew it was coming. As I stood in my father's room, waiting for the coroner to come, my hands, so accustomed to being clenched in anger, unfolded in prayer over my grieving family. For the first time in years, I felt the gentle, comforting weight of God's hand on my shoulder. Then my sister shared the miracle. In his final breath, my father got out of bed and fell to his knees with his arms lifted toward heaven and his face turned upward like a child reaching for his father. His last word wasn't goodbye, but help. And in that instant, I saw with perfect clarity. Death had not taken him. Love had come for him. My heart, though softening, still resisted full surrender. I began leaving cracks in the door for God, brief prayers and stolen moments, tentative glances towards heaven when the night felt too long, small acknowledgements that perhaps someone was listening after all. Yet the hollow ache remained. a cavern within me that no earthly comfort could fill. There were still nights I begged God to end me, to let me go and allow the darkness to swallow me whole so the pain would finally stop. Mercifully, those prayers went unanswered. I didn't know it yet, but this was the tension of transformation. The space between I can't and I will, where God does his quietest, most patient work. My healing couldn't be rushed. The emptiness that haunted me wasn't absence after all. It was the hollow before the filling, the silence before the song. I was not yet whole, but no longer quite so broken. Then the world stood still when the pandemic started. And in the strange stillness, we returned to Johannesburg. First me and my boys, then a little later my mom and sister. For the first time in years, I wasn't running, not toward the numbing embrace of substances, nor into the arms of another broken love. Instead, I found myself waking up to simple, little moments. The sound of my son's laughter echoing through our own space, the ordinary miracle of being present in my own life. The custody matter settled, my ex-husband now not completely tethered to my life. I was standing, perhaps unsteadily, but standing all the same. Then came the morning when grace wore the face of an unexpected longing. I woke with a quiet urgency to open my father's Bible, the one he had bought on the day of his diagnosis. Its pages barely touched by his hands. As I began to read, something shifted. 2 hours each day became my sanctuary. Prayers became conversation rather than crisis. And for the first time, I felt God's presence not as a concept, but as a companionship. In the quiet space of my little steps to surrender, I dared to ask for more, for a love that wouldn't break what God was mending. I prayed for a man who would see my sons not as burdens, but as his own, a man whose hands would build rather than bruise, whose faith would anchor rather than abandon. And God, in his darkness, sent Rob, a man who entered our lives not as a savior, but as a partner, whose love for my boys was as natural as breathing, whose steady presence felt like coming home. In him, I saw the answered prayer I'd stopped believing could exist, the living proof that God had been writing a better story all along. Life with Rob was good, so good that somewhere along the way, I let my Bible gather dust on the shelf. I had only really sort of welcomed Jesus into my heart. I kept him in the foyer, close enough to acknowledge, but not so near that he might rearrange the furniture of my comfortable life. The gnawing emptiness had shrunk to a whisper, but its echo remained, a quiet reminder that answered prayers weren't the same as surrendered devotion. When Rob proposed, we began searching for a pastor to marry us. At first, it felt like another item on our wedding checklist, but God was stitching grace into these moments. Rob's client mentioned Garth, just a name at first, until a coffee meeting became the beginning of a complete transformation of my life. And when Garth invited us to SBC, I expected just another church building. What I found was home. The warmth of those first Sundays wrapped around me like an embrace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. We were welcomed into a space that just felt right. We began marriage classes at SBC to prepare us for our marriage. Not only did we learn how to love each other well, I discovered the author of love himself. The Jesus I'd kept at arm's length began dismantling my walls, not with force, but with relentless kindness. Our weeks took on a new rhythm. Saturdays spent learning the language of love in marriage classes, Sundays immersed in worship at SBC. Slowly that lingering emptiness began to fill, not with my own striving, but with a grace that seeped into all the broken places I'd stopped trying to mend. Things started to change as I courageously turned to face my past, every trauma, every heartache, every desperate night. I began to see the story differently. There in my darkest moments, when I had begged for death, I now recognized divine fingerprints. Every time I'd cried out that no one wanted me, I could almost hear the echo of his whisper, "But I do." When the world had left me for broken, he had been gathering up the pieces. The prayers I thought went unanswered had been lovingly rerouted. The The nights I thought I'd survived alone, he had been carrying me. And then my carefully constructed walls gave way, and my heart cracked wide open, and love came rushing in. One Sunday morning service, it just clicked, not as a thought, but as a lightning strike of truth. In an instant, Jesus, the Son of God, had taken my sins upon that cross, the weight of my failures, my shame, my wandering. He carried it all willingly, lovingly, and then glory beyond comprehension. He rose, shattering death's grip forever. I prayed with a heart laid bare, no pretense, no holding back. I invited Jesus in, acknowledging him as my Lord, my Savior, my everything. And with that surrender came the unshakable assurance. Through him, I have eternal life. The shame that had weighed me down for decades dissolved in the light of this truth. His sacrifice on the cross wasn't for some perfected version of me. It was for the broken, lost, addicted, aching woman I had been. Where I saw only failure, he saw a daughter worth dying for. The freedom I found wasn't the absence of my past, but the presence of his redeeming love. No longer defined by what I'd done or what had been done to me, but by who I belonged to. For the first time in my life, I breathed without the weight of the world crushing my chest. The depression that had shadowed me for over a decade, a relentless fog I'd learned to navigate but never outrun, began to lift. The all-consuming pain that had been my constant companion, the shame that had wrapped around my bones, the horror of all I'd endured and all I'd done, they didn't just disappear, they were consumed, burned away in the refining fire of God's love. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17 says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." How breathtakingly true this became in my life. Jesus didn't just clean me up, he made me new, not just patched up, but recreated, not just forgiven, but unrecognizable from who I once was. My surrender to Jesus didn't just bring newness, it brought beauty beyond anything I could have dreamed. What began as a broken life offered up in fragments has become a story of restoration that still takes my breath away. Together with Rob, we stepped into the work of youth ministry, not as perfect people, but as living proof of grace. Our home and our lives became deeply rooted in faith. We started getting more involved in church life, joined a small group, and for the first time in my life, I discovered real friendship, the kind that doesn't flinch at your scars, but celebrates your healing. My identity is no longer in what was done to me or how the world dictated how I should be. It is no longer in what I've done. My identity is in Christ alone. My life isn't perfect. Hard days still come. I still stumble. I still sin. But now I'm learning to fall forward into his grace, to lean on him in the valleys as much as on the mountaintops. All the years the locusts had eaten, he has restored them to a life that could never have been without him. And here's the miracle I carry in my bones, the truth I want everyone to know. No one is too broken for Jesus. No past is too dark. No shame is too deep. And no life is too far gone. Jesus can restore it all, not because of anything you've done, but because of everything he's done. That cross, it was for you. That empty tomb, it was for your new beginning. All he asks is your surrender, your yes to his love, your open hands to receive what he longs to give. Let him heal what's broken. Let him redeem what was stolen. Let him rewrite your story. In Christ, even the most shattered life can become a masterpiece of grace. Jesus waited for me patiently in that field of daisies. His arms remained open wide, never weary, never withdrawing, even though I took so long to come home. And now, after all my wandering, after all my resisting, I am finally, once again, cradled in his embrace.